planes, trains, and automobiles. No, it's just the art of travel. As you know, Total Education will take you to places all over the world to film, and today a big shout out to Jeffrey Zeng as we talk about the exotic in Alain de Botton's The Art of Travel. Well, welcome to this very short talk on the exotic with Alain de Botton's The Art of Travel. If we look very carefully at the Art of Travel and its sections it's divided into, we can probably place each one in some sort of context. This one particularly looks at Botton himself and his travels to Amsterdam, and Gustave Flaubert and his travels to Egypt and how he saw the exotic. So let's put the little thing into context. I'm going to read you a passage now written by Laini Tatzis in her book on this subject. In the 18th century, with political stability in Europe and the ability for individuals to travel to develop an understanding of the cultures and art of the East, an interest in the development of the exotic arose. The exotic was seen as something unusual, different, often bizarre, but mysterious and outlandish, something to be understood and learnt from. The comparison of Flaubert's perception of the Orient and the exotic with de Botton's visit to Amsterdam provides the reader with an examination of the engagement with a culture and landscape different from our own. This allows the opportunity for an individual to redefine who they are through the use of their imagination and their connections to different people, places and races, rather than just through their place of birth. Now, de Botton mentions this very clearly at the start of the section on the exotic, and he tries to define the exotic and make some sort of attempt to discuss it, and he does this very successfully in many ways. And we think about the exotic, and he says very clearly on page 78 of The Art of Travel, "My enthusiasms in Amsterdam were connected to my dissatisfactions with my own country, with its lack of modernity and aesthetic simplicity, with its resistance to urban life and its net-curtained mentality. What we find exotic abroad may be what we hunger for in vain at home. To understand why Flaubert found Egypt exotic, it may therefore be useful first to examine his feelings toward France. What would strike him as exotic, that is, both new and valuable about Egypt, was in many ways the obverse of what had driven him to rage at home." We go on later to read about Flaubert and how bored he was constantly. And there's a number of techniques, of course, that de Botton uses in The Art of Travel. He does listing. He certainly in this one uses personal anecdote. He often goes back in history, as he does here with Flaubert, and quote directly. And he uses quotes from other sources. And you'll find all these sorts of things in the chapter, as well as these are supported, of course, by the pictures. So what point does he make in this thing? What he says is, the exotic to us is just something new and something very different. And it's how we take it and observe it that makes us different, better, worse, or still bored. Now, Flaubert, for example, was extremely bored in France. He wrote in his diary many times, and we see the repetition there, bored, bored, bored. And he's constantly so bored that he invents new dictionaries for himself, and that show his boredom and his sort of sarcasm and his attitude towards life in France. When he gets to Egypt, it's all new and exciting. He loves the hustle, he loves the bustle. He meets a woman there, and there's lots of stories and little anecdotes that he tells. But too soon we find him bored there as well, and there is an account of him being bored on a journey down the Nile. The new and exotic can only be new and exotic, I suppose, for so long, and then it becomes regular, and it becomes just like everything else to us. And I think that's the point in some ways that de Botton is making, that we have to find something interesting in our travels, whether we're going to new and exotic places all the time or we're going to places that are very familiar with us. Can we find those things at home? And I think he talks about that later in the book. So that's just a quick brief rundown of that idea of that little section on the exotic, and that was a special favour for one of our subscribers who particularly wanted some information and interest in that. Don't forget to look at the other Art of Travel lectures that we have in this series. I hope you've enjoyed this little short one. Thanks very much for your time, and goodbye. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's show on the Art of Travel and talking about Gustave Flaubert and the exotic. Don't forget, go to any of these places and you'll find more information about us. Support us. Thanks very much, and look out for our other videos on the Art of Travel.